Hi, hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to I think it's the 9th day of the 12 days of shingles. And when I when I thought of doing the 12 days of shingles, I had no idea that, I don't think I had any idea that I'd actually write one or two eventually. So it now seems in hindsight super self-serving, which is a little bit embarrassing. But what the hell? We're gonna read some anyway. So 9th day of shingles. Yay! The reason why I started all this is because I wanted to support the guys, obviously. And also because I like collecting things like Star Wars cards, like when I was a kid, Archie's comics, stuff like that. And I think we're headed toward, you know what, I honestly don't remember what number shingles we're on. 40, upper 40s, 40, 50, I don't know. But I kind of want to collect them all. And maybe I will next Authors and Dragons Con, which is happening in Charlotte in August. So maybe see you there. Anyway, let's get to this. Got my hat on. Oops. You see that? Okay. So I'm going to be reading today from this. Oh, nice. The Secret of the Old Cock. I was a big Nancy Drew fan when I was little. So this has nothing to do with that, obviously, for legal reasons. All right, I'm going to start with chapter 3. Let's just get right into it. Hold on, adjust my hat. So eventually I'm probably going to start sweating. Okay, chapter 3, Rest in Pieces. Mimsy smoothed down the front of her poodle skirt. She'd had to crawl over some fallen dusty taxidermy pieces to get to the front door. 2 stuffed roosters with bald patches where the feathers were missing, a turkey, a black cat with only one yellow marble eyeball because the other one was sewn over, and an old lady mannequin in a purple housecoat and a sideways wig. Mimsy had almost lost a shoe trying to answer the doorbell in time. The door itself didn't swing open very easily. It was partway blocked by the mannequin's leg, but when Mimsy pushed it aside with her pump, which she'd managed to grab before the shoe disappeared entirely between 2 black garbage bags, the mannequin's leg broke clean off. After some struggling, Mimsy was able to toss the dusty, decaying leg aside and get the door open. A man with brown pants and a clipboard stood on the front step. He had dark eyes and a square jaw, and there was a gun in a holster on his belt. His gaze swept up and down her and came to rest on her chest. She still had the tight lace dress on top of her sweater, so it didn't concern her that her top area had caught his eye. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" he asked rather rudely. Mimsy had thought he was much better looking than Daddy until he'd asked that and in such a gruff manner. "I don't remember you. Are you Jeb's girl? What's your name? Are you Fanny?" he asked before she'd even had a chance to introduce herself. "Where's Jebediah? His money is due today." Mimsy put her hands on her hips and frowned. If the man wasn't going to let her speak, how could she answer his questions? "What's the matter? Are you brain damaged? I wouldn't be surprised since Jebediah married his cousin." "Who are you?" she finally interrupted him. She didn't like to be rude back, but it was the only way she could get a word in edgewise. "I'm Peter B. Jackanoff. I'm from the city, Miss Crotchley. I'm here to collect Jebediah's back taxes on his property. We tried to call him again and again until we found out he doesn't have a working phone. Then we sent him a letter after letter, but it seems he never checks his mail. We've given him 3 extensions to come up with the funds so far, and this is his last chance. Otherwise, we're going to have to claim this house and land. Then we'll put it up for auction." But I thought he owned this whole place, all the land and everything on it. Rumor has it, it's been in the family all the way back to when they first crawled out of the swamp. That's the story I've been told as well, but the government needs a little piece of it every year. I'd explain it to you, miss, but I don't think you'd understand. So if you could go get him for me and tell him to bring out his money to pay his bill, we can wrap this business up. The government taking money every year on property that someone fully owned didn't make any sense to Mimsy. In fact, it sounded a little bit criminal. She also didn't appreciate him calling her stupid, but she was nothing if not a polite girl. She did her best to tell him the truth. He's in the other room trying to stop the hookers from taking his money. The man squinted at her. Is that so? He wrote something down in his papers. She didn't know what kind of notes he might be taking, but his clipboard looked very official. She didn't want Jebediah to get into more trouble and get his house and all of his money taken away. If all he had to do was pay this man some of it, the government might leave him alone, at least until next year. Right on cue, the yelling and screaming from the other room grew so loud, it became what Mimsy's daddy might have called a god-awful ruckus. The government man's head snapped up and he frowned. He took a step forward. Maybe I should come inside and see what the trouble is. It sounds like something fishy is going on. No, it always smells like that. She used the toe of her mother's pump to kick the one-eyed stuffed pussy away from the door. Listen, she told the man, if you stay out here on the front porch and I'll go get Jebediah. It may take some time to get him. He's an old man. You wait here and be patient. We'll get this all sorted out. Because she was nothing if not dependable. Plus, there was no room for the government man to wait inside the house anyway. Not with the dusty gray, broken-legged mannequin lying there, along with all the other stuffed dead animals. The man squinted at her again and then patted the gun at his hip. Tell your daddy I don't want any trouble. He threatened to shoot me last time I was here. I'm just doing my job and I don't want to have to defend myself. This man meant business. And how did he know Daddy? That confused her a bit. However, Mimsy wasn't going to let herself be intimidated by him. He'd been rude to her, and now he was threatening people with his gun. That didn't seem polite to Mimsy at all. When she shut the front door on him, she stood on her tiptoes in her mother's pumps and looked through the peephole to make sure he wasn't going to do any funny business. However, he crossed his arms over his clipboard. Then he turned his back to her and stared out over the messy yard, shaking his head. She heard whistling. Maybe he was just trying to amuse himself. Well, he could stand out there whistling all day long for all she cared. Maybe he'd learned some manners. The whistling stopped, and she wondered if he'd choked on his own spit. It would serve him right. Jebediah hadn't crawled back over the junk from the study by the time she got rid of the government man. Maybe he'd had trouble finding the hookers and all of that mess. Or maybe he'd fallen between some of the junk and couldn't get up. What if they'd gotten lost in the mess? She needn't have worried, however, because she heard them begin to yell at each other again. Thank goodness for that. Mimsy stood uncertainly, debating whether she should take off her shoes and try to climb over the piles. Should she go to the other room to help her schoolmates search for Jebediah's money? Since he was in there with them, they may have convinced him to help them look for it. With his assistance, they could probably find it in no time at all. While she waited, she decided to continue tidying up, especially by the front door. The crusty old mannequin was just in the way, and the government man was probably going to want to come inside while he spoke to Jebediah. Mimsy leaned down and grabbed the mannequin under the arms to drag it away from the entryway. But the dirty old doll was heavier than it looked. Now she knew what it meant when people said dead weight. And that was even leaving one leg behind. Nevertheless, she huffed and puffed until she dragged the old doll over to Jebediah's couch. Mimsy was nothing if not a persistent girl and a hard worker, even though the filthy dummy soiled her skirt. Then she tugged some more to try to prop it up next to the spot where he usually sat. She thought it would look cute and maybe give him a little scare. When Jebediah came back and sat next to it, they'd look like a little old married couple. She giggled to herself, but when she gave the doll a final push to position it on the couch, its arm came right off, too. Gosh darn it. She stared at the detached limb in her hand. It was amazing how realistic they made mannequins these days. This one even had blue old lady arm veins, and how cute was it that old Jebediah had put a wedding ring on her hand? Goodness, maybe this was one of his artwork creations as well, kind of like that lamp on the other side of the couch with the shade made of stitched together animal skin. She didn't know what kind of animal he'd made it from, but it was probably from a farm that branded their livestock, because one section had a blurry bluish tattoo, although she didn't know what farm used an anchor as their symbol. Mimsy decided to stop dawdling, so she laid the loose arm on the mannequin's lap and also retrieved the missing leg to put on the floor in front of the couch. No doubt old Jebediah would get a kick out of that when he returned from dealing with the hookers. There was a loud crash from the other room that almost made her jump, and then a low moaning sound, almost like a cow. Mimsy figured she would go see what had happened just as soon as she finished positioning the old lady doll. But the doorbell rang again. She smoothed her skirt and made her way back to the door. The sun had started to go down, and she had to shade her eyes to block the bright orange light. You sure are impatient, mister, she intended to scold the government man, because she told him Jebediah would be back in a few minutes. Maybe the man thought Jebediah would be finished with the hookers a lot quicker than that. Maybe other old men took less time than Jebediah did with them, or maybe they were a lot more businesslike in their financial negotiations. They were asking where his hidden money was, after all. Mimsy didn't know, and she didn't even want to speculate about her friends. However, when she opened the door more, it wasn't the government at all, but a man wearing a dark hoodie instead. What in the world are you doing? Why are you knocking on the door, Daddy? And what did you do with that other man? Mimsy asked him. But then the man lifted his head, and it wasn't Daddy at all. This man had a scruffy beard, dark mean eyes, and a scar running from his forehead down across his cheek. He raised one finger to his mouth as if to shush her. She didn't know who he was or why he was dressed like Daddy, and even though she wasn't a jumpy kind of girl, she was so taken aback that she gave a little shriek, slammed the door shut, and locked it. It's not that I was scared because I thought he was a ghost or something. I don't believe in ghosts. That wasn't the junkyard creeper, no matter if he did look exactly like they say he does, she told herself, now that she was safely on the other side of the door from the stranger who was definitely not an evil thieving spirit. It's just that I didn't know him and I was surprised. Nevertheless, she didn't open the door back up to get the stranger's name, which she would have done if she had been certain it was an actual real-life person. As if to confirm her worst fears, she stood on her tiptoes to look through the peephole, and the scarred stranger was gone. Who's at the door? Jebediah asked right behind her. She whirled around at the scratchy sound of his voice and the feel of his breath on the back of her neck. With all the commotion, she hadn't heard the scuttle of his bony legs when he'd crawled back over the piles of junk into the room from the study. She gasped. What in the world happened to your face? His skin had not been in the best condition before he'd gone into the other room. For one thing, he was terribly old. He usually looked like some of those crab apples at the park a week or two after they fell on the ground. Willie Johnson, the girl at the makeup counter down at the Quick Fix, probably could have given him a cream to help with all those wrinkles and dark spots. But now his face looked even worse. Half of it looked scalded to pieces. A big stripe of skin starting from his forehead, running across his left eye, all the way down to his neck on the other side, was red and blistering, almost like it had melted right off his skull. He blinked his good eye. The other eyelid didn't seem to work anymore, and had the foolishness to deny anything was different. What do you mean? It's always been like this. Now that she was looking at Jebediah, she saw he also had a red ring around his neck, almost in the pattern of handprints, and 4 long scratches down his shoulder like a wild animal had clawed him, or maybe a hooker with long nails like charity pro bonos. And what happened to your throat and arm? She asked him. Mind your business and bring me my sardines and crackers. He hobbled over to the couch. He seemed to be limping a bit, but also something was making the front of his yellowed underpants stick out, almost like he'd stuck one of his cock sculptures down into his ratty drawers. When he reached the couch, he gathered up his bathrobe from where it lay on the floor. One of his hands had a piece of cloth wrapped around it like a bandage, and she wondered where that had come from. Maybe he'd fallen on his way to the study. Old people fell a lot, and one of the hookers had wrapped it up for him. Jebediah made a big show of putting on his robe and wrapping it up tightly around his body before placing himself on the couch next to the mannequin. He barely glanced at the doll next to him. I always knew you'd come crawling back, Enid, he told it. Then he said to Minzy, I'm exactly as I was before I left this room, and I'll thank you not to comment on my appearance again. Now go get me my snack. All right. That's it for me today. The Secret of the Old Cock. See, there's a rooster right there. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Enjoy the rest of these 12 days, these magnificent 12 days of Shingles. Season's greetings. Happy New Year. Hasta la vista. Have a good one.